The culture of that working dynamic is the single most important aspect of any brand, because how those people behave, the ways they make decisions, the way in which they engage in their work and engage the customer is going to matter more than any logo or website or product that you create.
What's up, branding experts? Arek here at Ebaqdesign, and welcome to On Branding Podcast. And today, my guest is Mark Miller and Ted Vaughn. So Mark leads brand strategy and marketing transformation at Historic Agency, which is a brand strategy shop helping purpose-driven organizations to build brands that matter through culture, marketing, and design. And Ted leads client transformation at Historic Agency, and he specializes in executive leadership, brand development, and strategic clarity. So Mark and Ted have led nearly 100 rebrands together at Historic Agency. And they also co-authored the book, Culture Built My Brand, which is the book right here. And they basically documented their experience in brand building in this book. So we are going to talk about the content of this book. Hello, Mark and Ted. Thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to start with the basics. So you've got a lot of experience in running successful rebranding projects, right? And clients come to you with different brand problems, like our customer experience is broken, we've got high employee turnover, or our marketing isn't working, isn't driving enough traffic. But as you both noticed, the real reason is rarely the brand itself, it's the culture that underlines the brand, right? Mm-hmm. So in the first chapter of your book, you explain why culture is so important to brand building. So I just wanted to start off with some basics and explain to, maybe you can guys explain to our listeners, what is culture and why it is so important when it comes to brand building?
Well, from the very beginning of our agency, culture was a critical pillar of brand. We talked about it from day one. It opened a lot of doors and closed a lot of deals, but we didn't really know how to service culture as an extension of our brand work. And, it was really an experience of our own organizational culture combined with multiple experiences with brands we were serving and walking alongside and just observing in popular culture that I think began to equip us to know how to address culture. But I think at the start to your question, culture in the book is company culture, right? Culture is one of those big, I think, blurry words. And we want to, from the very beginning, just focus on organizational culture, the people that are housed together on mission with you to accomplish something. The culture of that working dynamic is the single most important aspect of any brand, because how those people behave, the ways they make decisions, the way in which they engage in their work and engage the customer is going to matter more than any logo or website or product that you create. We've always known that in the back of our mind, but I think our journey over the last 8 years has brought us to a place of understanding that at a level of depth that allowed us to write this book and really begin to engage our customers more effectively and more holistically.
I think, the tipping point for us to write the book was we just kept seeing this pattern of companies. We implement strategies similar to the ones that you talk about in your blog. Some clients would grow 100x and others would barely make it out of the gates with the brand, or they would stumble, or the rebrand wouldn't see the day of light, right? And so what we noticed was a pattern of the internal culture starting to devour itself, right? The way people behaved, we want to be innovative, but our risk tolerance is really low, and we don't, we talk back bad about each other behind each other's backs, and all these inappropriate or unhealthy behaviors that just made it impossible for the brand to succeed in implementation. And so that's kind of how we got to the point of writing the book.
I see. That makes sense. So what is really interesting, I want to show this to the listeners. So you were talking about that it's rarely that brands fail because of their logo or visuals or even marketing strategy. It's because the internal culture eat their brands away, right? So that's for our listeners. It's a very clever book cover right here. It says culture ate my brand. It's crossed off culture built my brand, right? So that's the premise of the book. So since we understand more or less what culture is, and we're on the same page here, now I wanted to spend a couple of minutes going through a few chapters of your book, just giving like a high level overview to our listeners. So that if they're interested, they can just learn more by checking out your book, right? So in the next chapter, you talk about principles. And here you guys explain why is that just listing core values won't do the job. So can you talk to us a bit about why are those behavior-based principles are so important and how to turn, regular values that we all know how to develop into those more actionable principles?
Over the years of corporate company culture, values have been a pretty core element of any organization, but they've grown so blurry and they've grown so innocuous that while most brands have them, in our experience, 80% of the time, they are nice ideas that don't shape behavior, that don't actually change the way people behave. And that leads to brand gaps like Enron, where you have values of authenticity and integrity, integrity etched into the marble that people walk past every day. But many of those staff are still in prison for a lack of integrity. Mm-hmm. And while that's the classic example, that gap plays out in organizations small and large. And it becomes a huge problem for brands because they have things they say and they espouse, but their people don't embrace. And that gap is seen and felt and known, and it leads to a sense of betrayal. And a lot of times the customer won't articulate it or see it or sense it, but they feel it and they know it. And it leads them to no longer engage or trust the brand. So principles are either a way of kind of recasting your values, get rid of values are old school, recast them as principles. Or if you have values and the values are important, put some sub-bullets under those values of behaviors, of actionable, clear behaviors that everybody in your brand can be held accountable to following so that you're actually, as a company, behaving in a way that supports the values that you espouse.
And a modern example would be like Uber, right? When Uber started to implode, the experience for the customer was that as well, right? There was surge pricing when it was inappropriate and, drivers weren't being taken care of and delays and all kinds of inappropriate behavior that was happening at the consumer level was also happening at the corporate level, right? And so really understanding how your employees are behaving, on brand related to your purpose, related to your mission as an organization is really rare. And so that's why we define principles as the line that separates organizations who say they're about something, but really don't live it out, and the ones that actually execute in a way that it starts attracting talent and customers.
Now, we are going to take a quick break here, but we'll be right back. Listen, my mission is to help people design iconic brands. So whether you're a business leader who wants to be more intentional with branding and all of its aspects, or you're a creative professional who wants to attract powerful clients and truly be able to help them succeed with branding, then you need to start with a discovery session in order to develop a strategy that will inform all of your creative work. And everything that you need to learn how to do that, you can find in my online courses at ebaqdesign.com/shop, where I share with you my worksheets, case studies, video tutorials, and other additional resources to help you feel safe and strong about your process. Now let's get back to our interview. Right. So it all makes sense. So some of the key takeaways from this part, is about bridging that gap, right? It's not about just listing your core values. It's about, making them actionable and then rewarding your team for implementing them, for putting them into action, right?
Right.
Okay, so in the next chapter, you talk about architecture. What you mean by that is all organizational systems and structures, right, that exist internally. So it's basically the whole ecosystem, right? So can you talk to us a bit, what kind of structures can we create to support our team to deliver on that brand promise?
So the book talks about architecture because we've never found an architect to just care about the internal systems. They're all designed and built in a way to support a work of art that is contextual and built for purpose, built to match the environment it's in. And we think your HR systems and structures, whether they're compensation, hiring processes, how you supervise, all of those systems, that entire structure needs to be intentionally designed in a way that matches the internal culture that you want to create and the external reality of your branded market. And when you start to really look creatively at how systems and structures can be designed to support people in creative ways, it's infinite, the amount of ways that you can design your systems and structures to help further your brand value and what your brand is about. HR shouldn't just be there, not there, healthy, not healthy. HR, organizational architecture, should be a way of furthering your unique brand value.
Yeah. So just a couple of examples of that.
Yeah.
Like a historic agency, one of our principles is people-centered. And so not only do we take that approach in our design thinking and how we interact with clients, but that's also our internal approach. So just our company expense report system, right? You get a credit card, and our credit card is great because that card texts you when you make a purchase, and you can take a photo of the receipt and respond to that text message, and your expense report is basically done. If we weren't people-centered, we might have an expense report that requires multiple hours worth of work and hunting down receipts and scanning them and uploading them to some Microsoft system that then has to get approved by somebody. And there's all these hoops to jump through. So that's one example of how a system can be designed in a way that makes people's lives a little bit easier, that understands the work that they have to do isn't expense reports, but it's not working for accounting. It's actually getting their work done right as designers or copywriters or whatever it might be. Another great example is, like Ted was saying, is HR. And if you want to be innovative and your team needs deep work or deep focused thinking work or highly collaborative work, but you don't create an environment in which that can happen, you really don't value innovation, right? You say you do, becomes that word on the wall. And if you do value those things, then how are you creating an environment where collaboration happens or people have space for deep focused work? So that's one way to look at it. How you hire people. Another great example would be Menlo Innovations. It's a software engineering firm, but they have programmers that work in pairs. So one computer, one keyboard, one monitor for two programmers, which is highly unique. And the reason they do that is it eliminates errors. One person can look over the other person's shoulder. So how they interview isn't like, we'll just post a job on LinkedIn and interview people. And their CEO says interviews are kind of just everyone lying until they get the position. And so what they do is they actually bring two people in at a time, and they make them work together to solve a problem. And someone watches them and sees how they interact. Who's a leader? Who's a follower? What kind of do they understand problem solving in a collaborative format, all that. And so their hiring process reflects the brand and the culture they want to build. And so those are examples of how you can customize the structure, the systems inside your organization to really elevate the brand purposes or the brand values, the brand pillars of your brand.
Yeah, these are great examples. It totally makes sense. And I think we can all relate to that, especially to those, like creating an ecosystem that would make the team members' lives easier, not harder, to support their work. And as you just mentioned, those examples with those receipts and stuff like that, I can definitely relate to some of those things. So let's talk about the next important thing you talk about is rituals. So as the name suggests, it's all about rituals, right? It's all about those activities that would engage employees and the whole team and create a sense of joy and excitement, as you say in your book, right? So, which in turn will drive more brand success, right? If the team is happy and is excited, it will only benefit brand success. So can you guys talk to us a bit about those rituals and perhaps give us some examples so we can understand this concept?
Any brand that has more than two people employed has rituals. Those rituals might just be meetings. They might be things that are perfunctory or just, management type things, but they are rituals. They're patterns of behavior that lead to engagement. We believe the best rituals are things that come up organically, where people are so in love with an aspect of your brand or a brand value or something about your brand that they begin doing things organically that reflect your brand value. And they happen often outside the purview of senior leadership. Because, and again, in the book, we give examples, because the best rituals are things that your people design and do independent of your hierarchical control, like calling meetings or doing scavenger hunts or whatever that might be.
Yeah. And so if you think about it, going back, and the reason we call these layers to marquee culture, right? The idea of a culture being a big sign that attracts customers and talent for your brand, is that when people start behaving on brand, not just doing what they're supposed to be doing, but behaving on brand as employees, they start, as Ted said, wanting to do activities that elevate that brand and experience that brand. Now, you could do top-down activities, but what we found is the more powerful ones are the ones that are grassroots, right? And so the example we gave in the book, next to your computer on a mobile device, you can Google the NASA pumpkin carving contest and find examples. But that's an example of a ritual every year NASA does. They don't pay for it. The engineers, use their own time, their own money, and they hold this competition where they carve pumpkins, and it's, some of them actually, lift off like rockets, and some of them are elaborate set pieces. Some of them are robotic, and it's a way for them to express creativity in their engineering that they may not be able to do every day, but that when a mission goes wrong and there's a problem in space, they have to use that creativity to solve the problems because there's limited resource, limited time. And so that's a way that they've created a ritual. And, that's obviously an extreme example with rocket scientists. For us, one of our principles is be the fun. And so we want people to own having fun at work. And it's not a cruise ship director, someone telling you, hey, this is a mandatory happy hour, everyone come. And so someone came up with the idea of, we want to get to know our remote employees a little bit better. Let's do a music club where everyone submits an album once a week, or one person submits an album every week, and we listen to it as a team while we're working, and then we review and give each other feedback. And it gives us a way to understand somebody that's in a different context or in a better way. And that's taken off, and we do that every week, and we make time for that ritual so that people can have fun listening to music and understanding each other better as team members.
Right. These are great examples. So again, rituals just about, celebrating together, some team building activities, as you mentioned, with music. It could be something about friendly competition as well, right? And you give us a lot of examples in the book. So if you guys want to learn more about that, I recommend you check out the book. So I just wanted to go through a few more chapters to just help our listeners understand, because the book really covers all those aspects of building a brand culture in depth. And you also give us pretty comprehensive worksheets, which is really awesome. So it's very practical. I just wanted to get it out there for our listeners who are interested in that. And the next chapter is about lore, and which is about stories that circulate in the organization, right? And this could be something positive or something negative. So in your book, you give us some tips on how to turn those negative stories in, how to address them and how to turn them into something positive. So perhaps you could, guys, give us some examples of what are some of the good or bad laws and how to address them, how to fix those negative ones.
So usually lore is attached to a person. Maybe it's somebody who is caught doing something, embarrassing or crazy, and that becomes a story that echoes through the hallways. Maybe it's a senior leader who behaves in such an extravagant or out of control way that they get, stereotyped, and there are these stories of incidences that, and as senior leaders, right, we often don't know those stories because they operate at a way that we're kind of insulated from, or the last thing people are going to do or tell us the story. Those can become cancers in any brand because they perpetuate a negative dimension of the brand that may or may not be true, but it's unhelpful. Positive lore is when you've got great stories of your founder. We talk about one of the founder of Patagonia and how a positive story shaped a culture that continues. Stories continue to echo through the hallways of Patagonia today about Yvon Chouinard. I think the first question for any senior leader is, what are the stories that are being told that I might not be aware of, and how can I, in a gentle, kind way, find out? and begin to understand what people are actually saying, what the stories actually are. And then are there ways to plant and tell positive stories that really present the brand in a way that is helpful and perpetuate the brand's true value? Mark probably has some good examples of that.
Yeah. So I think we call it in the book a mining for lore, where as leaders, once you become a leader, and that could be a context of you on a team or in a C-suite, people aren't going to tell you the truth anymore, like no matter how hard you want them to. So you have to build the bridge because you're the one with the authority and power and influence. So you have to build a bridge to them. And so you need to be proactively asking about, how things are going, what people are feeling, what are they hearing? And one way to do that is really at least the example I have of doing it at Historic is that when I onboard a new employee, I make it really clear. I go through a user guide that I wrote for myself, and it's about how I work in my default modes, good and bad. So here are all my good behaviors. Here are all my bad behaviors. And so I want you to call me out on those things, right? So I'm building trust by allowing someone to speak into my life and speak into my leadership. And then I ask them questions in our one-on-ones to really mine the stuff out of what's going on, right? So I can understand, okay, is it something with me? Is it something with the organization? And that's a way to find stories that may be negatively impacting. Usually the things that are positive, people will start talking about and you'll hear about it right away, but they could be, positive lore can take shape in a bunch of different formats. And we talk about that in the book. But story is so powerful when it comes to building your brand. And whether it's a founder story or something that the organization did that was super radically crazy, right? Like Red Bull has a bunch of stories of lore for their brand, right? From their founding and how they would crumple up cans and distribute them in trash cans in the middle of the night all over London to try to get people to think that people were partying in the middle of the night and drinking Red Bull, even though they were empty cans, to, launching someone out of a balloon in the stratosphere down to earth. Like they have all these great stories about trying to build their brand, right? And so think about your organization and what are those opportunities. And again, the lore it needs to empower the brand. So it can't just be like, oh, we helped raise a bunch of money for a charity. That could be great, but how is it elevating your brand, right? So that your customers and employees are more focused on who you are and what your differentiators are. So those are just some examples of how to mine for it. And for us, we've actually found out that we had negative lore because of some staffing changes that we made. And we had to, address it in a team and clarify why those changes were made and focus on the positive. So that's how you would take something that's negative and say, okay, this is what was learned from that experience and how we're moving forward as an organization to build positive. And everyone now looks back at that moment and they even kind of give it its own unique name, but we won't get into that. But they know that is a pivotal point in our organization's shift in culture, and what allows them to do what they can do today is because of this thing that happened in the past. So you can rewrite the story if you know what it is, and if you're willing as a leader to learn from it, and the brand willing to change if it needs to.
Okay. Some of my key takeaways. So lores showcase your culture at its best or at its worst. Basically, those stories that people tell behind your back. So you should be proactive, as you mentioned. You should address them. Of course, you cannot control everything, but you can address the toxic ones. As you said, you can either admit to it and try to rewrite this story with something positive. So basically, try to counteract this negative story and try to fix it, right?
I think that's the theme in this entire book. Everything we're talking about is not rocket science. It's not like this breakthrough idea that nobody ever considered. Oh my gosh, people are telling stories of my company. I think what we're challenging people to do is actually take these aspects of your culture seriously, because if you leverage them for good, if you refocus them, or at worst, neuter the negative, then your brand's going to be in a healthier place. And so essentially what we're saying is don't underestimate the power of your culture to be a power for good or a power for bad. Take it seriously. And here are ways to take it seriously, right? I mean, it just, the theme is intention, effort. Just take the time to do this intentionally,
Yeah. You encourage us to actually pay attention to those things. Yeah. And it makes all sense, because when you think about brand, what is a brand is actually what people think about you when you are not there, right? Is that perception for the most part, right? So internal culture is a big part of that, right? So, and the stories we tell, for example, so one of those things that we can work with to try to, influence that culture and build a strong culture, right? So, and a strong brand ultimately. So another thing you talk about in your book is vocabulary. So obviously it's about, words and phrases that would inspire our team, our people to produce better results. So can you talk to us a bit about that?
These layers all permeate one another. I'm sure you're starting to see that, right? So your principles will ultimately inform positive stories, or ideally reflect founders' stories. Your architecture should tie back to your principles, which should reflect your values if you have those. Well, vocabulary really is kind of the ultimate layer that permeates all of these. Essentially, it's coming up with language that allows your culture to be more sticky, because there are phrases or words that help people understand more quickly. I don't know. Is that how you say that? Anyways, the language, words create worlds. And by having a sticky phrase or idea, it instantly triggers in people, oh, that's right, that's our value. So it might be that your principle is phrased in a sticky way. It could be that one of those funny founder stories has kind of a 3-word phrase that points to it. It could be, and in the book, we talk a lot about Netflix and a lot of the great sticky vocabulary words they've developed over the years that aren't really meant for the external customer. They're just internal culture shaping terms. But the minute you say them, the people who are on staff know exactly what that means. Mark, you've got a couple of examples of that.
Yeah. So one is sunshining. So at Netflix, they want to innovate, move fast, and learn from their mistakes. So when you make a mistake, you have to share it with the team and what your learnings. And this isn't to demotivate people and shame them. It's more let's learn from this person so that we don't make the same mistakes as a team, and we can keep innovating, right? And the one who made the biggest mistake is Reed Hastings. I think he's co-CEO now, or chairman, but founder of Netflix. And that's when he decided to make Quickster, the DVD mailing service, and spin it off as a separate company from the streaming service. And, he lost 40% of his stock valuation, I think, in a week. And so he had to, apologize for that, share his learnings. And so things come out of that. And sunshining is one thing from Netflix. Another phrase that they use is the keeper test, which is the idea that if you're in a manager and you have a team member, because they want top performers in every position. So if someone were to quit your team, what would you do to keep them? And if the answer is nothing, then you're supposed to fire them and leave that position open for an A player. So those are a couple ones, but there's also words that we kind of use that can have different meanings to people that aren't clearly defined. And you need to watch out for those and then either define them or remove them from the team's vocabulary. So in our example, we used the word hustle a lot when we first started, and our intent wasn't work all the time. It was more work smarter, not harder, and, be driven. And everyone had their own opinion of the word hustle. And it started to create an unhealthy culture. And so we had to address that by redefining it and slowly removing it from our vocabulary. So it wasn't as prominent as it once was, because it was having a negative impact on our culture. So words can create worlds that people live in. And so we want to be intentional about the language we're using. Just like you would be intentional about messaging to a customer, you want to be intentional about messaging to your team so that they can be on brand.
And in some ways, these layers are linear. Often what we find is brands that take their values or principles seriously begin to have words that become more significant or helpful than others. And those words now eventually become sticky vocabulary terms, but it plays out over 12 to 18 months, right? So, it's not like you need to launch with a new vocabulary lexicon for your staff tomorrow. Sometimes the best sticky terms are the ones that bubble up from your people because they're so invested in your brand, and that's another theme. By having people who are invested and clear and passionate about your brand, they're going to create stories and rituals and language that you can now adopt and leverage to keep your brand healthy and going forward.
And adjust and and refine those. Okay, so yeah, it all makes sense. And so yeah, as you said, words can create worlds, and words are important. So we should pay attention to those. And as the last one, you talk about artifacts. So it's all about look and feel, right? So as you said, these things overlap and they complement each other. So can you give us some examples of what kind of artifacts you have in mind? What can we create to support our culture?
So artifacts, that's the fun part for anyone who's a designer listening or creatives. That's where you get to start building the tangible things. And a lot of times that looks like, on brand swag at a company store or something that's, business cards or shirts or something like that.
But book covers.
Yeah. One of the things that we liked, what we saw in top performing brands, both the ones that we've worked with and the ones that we did research on, was that they had implemented various forms of artifacts that again pointed their team back to what the brand was about, so that they could do their work in a way that is going to move the brand forward. And so some of that was like Keep has, which used to be Infusionsoft, has a AstroTurf that looks like a football field, is like half size, I think, and even has a goalpost, I think, on one end. And they hold their team meetings there. And the reason they do that is that they want to remind everyone of the value of leaving it all in the field. So they want their team to leave it all in the field, work hard, put out your best ideas, so that you can look back and say, I put it all in the field. And so that's a reminder. Every time you walk past it, you're reminded of that value. Every time you have a staff meeting, you're reminded of that value, right? And that's what we call a environmental artifact, one where you're creating an environment for your team. And so that could be designs on the wall. That could be, a football field in your office, if that's the case. And then we go through the book and list out different types of artifacts that you can create. But the thinking here is to be creative, not just on brand, but be creative in ways that help empower people to operate and work on brand, right? So it's not necessarily about the logo as it is, like a lot of things that we do for our clients is create custom decks of cards that communicate the value or process or different tool sets that they need to use internally to keep them focused on brand and on the values or principles in how they operate as team members. So there's lots of different ways that you can implement artifacts in different shapes.
So yeah, you divide them into a few categories in your book. Yeah. So just some of my key takeaways for our listeners. So basically it's all about those tangible, visible objects, right? And as you said, they work as reminders to the team, to our people, about our principles and what's important for us and how to build that culture. So it could be swag, it could be pins, it could be, new hire welcome kits, nameplates or badges, decks of cards, as you mentioned, right? Annual journals, some awards, and also, as you mentioned, wall art, murals, some spatial artifacts, right? Micro museums, libraries, phone booths for personal calls, and meeting rooms and things like that. Okay, so that's great. We gave you guys high-level overview, but the book is really Mark and Ted go into depth into how to build your brand culture step by step, and then you can download and actually you are provided with worksheets.
Yeah, we included the tools that we use with our clients to help.
Which is really. I love this because it's very practical. I started filling out these worksheets. Of course, there's I'm not done yet. Yeah, so it's very, very practical. I just wanted to put it out there because some books are just there are great books about theory, but sometimes it's hard to put it into practice. But this is a very practical book with a lot of examples and a lot of step-by-step processes and worksheets. So as we are approaching the end of our interview, I just wanted to ask you guys, how to get in touch with you for people who just want to learn more about you and about your work. Obviously, I'm going to link the book in the description box, but how to get in touch with you, either for clients or people who just want to learn more about your work.
So our agency is Historic Agency, one word, HISTORICAGENCY.com. And I think across all the social channels I'm on, Ted, T-E-D, Vaughn, V-A-U-G-H-N, just at Ted Vaughn. So, Mark.
Mm-hmm. And you can hit me up on LinkedIn, Mark Michael Miller on LinkedIn, and that's primarily where I'm at.
And I think we still have a website for the book, right, Mark?
Yeah. Visit culturebuiltmybrand.com. That's where you can get a book, get the tools, and learn more.
Yeah, again, so probably the best way to find more about you is to go to the website, right? culturebuiltmybrand.com. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Mark and Ted, for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Love doing it. Thanks for having us. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for the promotion of the book.
Thank you. Bye.